Hey there, I am fired up. The wings are off the stands, the garage is clean. Let's make an airplane. Soon here, I'm going to be creating the ailerons and flaps and attaching those to the wings. This week, we are adding all the hardware and reinforcements needed to attach those pieces to the wings. So here we go. Alright, I can already tell that these are going to take some adjustment to get to fit correctly, but I think most of it can be done with some heavy deburring, mild sanding during that process. One curious note is where you'd expect some pre-drilled holes in the side here, there are none. So I'm going to check the plans and see if it says anything about them there, because there's absolutely nothing in the instructions. It's really pretty simple. They didn't drill the holes at the factory because that would create a unique part number. Why do that when I can drill the holes as I make the airplane? Makes sense to me. As I'm doing that, I'm also marking all of these pieces where I need to heavily deburr or radius corners or countersink certain holes. While these parts are all pretty simple, there are some special instructions that go with it. There's some close tolerances that are provided about gaps and how they might form and what's acceptable and what's not. We'll adhere to those when building it. There's also a service bulletin being sort of like an experimental version of a recall, where there's been some issues in the field and they've provided some parts to handle that. I'm going to detail about how this service bulletin might not be as easy as it seems as we put all these pieces together. Also, at the same time as the hinge brackets, I'm going to handle the aileron gap fairing and the flap support brace. All these pieces sort of intermingle. I want to make sure I'm not painting myself into a corner by installing the brackets and not mapping out these rivets and everything about the fit of these pieces very carefully. So at the heart of all of these, the service bulletin talk are these two pieces, a stiffener for the aileron hinge and a second stiffener, or a stiffener for the stiffener. These get sandwiched and go on the inside of the plane, but doing so creates some really difficult access to some of the rivets we're going to have to buck later. Some options that we have would be to trim these back, and that's probably the option that I'm going to be going with, as well as looking at alternative methods for riveting the aileron gap fairing in a location or two. That's something to keep in mind as all this comes together. I wanted to take a moment to thank everyone for all of the comments on my last video, all of the likes. It made it one of my most successful videos. That makes me happy. You keep it up and I'll keep it up, and once again, thank you. So at the corner of the stiffeners cut, that eliminates the problem of riveting the skins. Now we just have to worry about the large rivet for the aileron gap fairing. And I think I would be smart to have that rivet set before putting on the hinges, which is a bit different than what the instructions call for. But I don't see a great way to sneak in there and buck that rivet with that stiffener in place, which supports my idea of doing this sort of all at once. So with that in mind, I'm going to transition to those two fairings and brackets here and get those prepped and ready for primer. So the flat brace is the one with the holes, and it's also the one that requires us to trim a pretty acute angled piece off of it to make room for a doubler that I installed on the rear spar a long time ago. Looking at it, I think the only way that I'm going to be successful in cutting that is with the old tin snips. So it now fits. We can cleco it in, and it allows us to see the engineering on these pieces is incredible. These areas where we have a little bit of a split and they've reset the holes to accommodate the thickness of these doubler plates. It's pretty cool to think of what it took to get that right. Now, if we look down at the other end, my cut is not quite as precise, go figure. And in fact, I might have taken just a hair too much off. Our edge distance on one of the rivets is probably not where it needs to be. I'll verify that this is okay, but I've seen elsewhere people have done the same cut with the same results and it's been okay. So I'm happy with it, but we will take some precautions on it. Everything's on. I'm going to run through and pre-drill, match drill everything, which should be pretty straightforward. Then it all comes back off for some more deburring. You know the drill. Buns. Bracket here has you drilling 4 or 5 holes into the rib that were never pre-drilled. So it was pretty important that I make sure, to me, everything's flat and flush, and this is why I focus so much on deburring all of these pieces to make sure that we were getting all of our gaps tightened when we go to drill these holes and subsequently rivet these pieces. Okay, I'm at the point where all I have to do is some light dimpling, and then I can prep and prime. The dimpling I thought was pretty straightforward. Here we've got the skin and the aileron gap fairing. Those are the only two pieces involved. Both get dimpled. Over here it gets a little more difficult. We have the flat brace, and we'll have the bottom skin, but we also have this hinge that goes up here. And that leads me to believe that something's gonna have to be countersunk. The instructions aren't very instructive in this instance. I think it's a one line of install these pieces. And the real difficult part is the plans aren't very clear either. The skin and the brace are the same thickness as the flap skin and the flap spar that goes under that. It too gets half this hinge. So all of the same thicknesses of material. And that has a little bit more instruction in which it says dimple the skin, countersink this in order to place the hinge on this side with no dimple or countersink. If it's good for the flap, in my opinion, it's good for the brace too. So that's what I'm going to do. All right, it's time to prime these parts. Well, time to clean these parts, then time to prime these parts. All the parts are clean. Half of them are set up in there. It is not big enough to do the full batch, but we're used to that, so I'll prime half of them. We'll do that midway swap. I'll get the other ones in there. We'll prime those ones, and then we'll start building this stuff and get it attached to the wings. Well, like that, we're done. I still love how easy the priming process is. It does take time, it does cost money, but for having a primed airframe, it's a lot easier than I thought it would be. I'm gonna let these set for a bit, and then we'll start assembling parts. All right, the parts look fantastic. They've been sitting for a while. A nice light coat of primer, which is important on some of these. I'm going to start mocking up some of these parts, and then we're going to see what order they need to be installed on the wings. All right, so that's the finished piece. I think it came out pretty well. I'm gonna go ahead and get the other 3 wrapped up, and we'll see what it's gonna take to get the rest of these parts on the plane. The order that these pieces go on is pretty important. You know, this has to go on pretty early. As I mentioned earlier, there will be a rivet that's very hard to get to. However, there will be rivets that are very hard to get to on this if it doesn't get installed first. So 1, 2, and then we'll continue to work down the wing with the center hinge being number 3, the service bulletin stiffeners underneath being installed with that. And then last to go on is going to be the hinge bracket for the flaps. That's it. That's all the hardware that's going on the rear spar of this wing that's going to hold the flap and aileron, the control surfaces of the wing. And those are what are coming up next. And I'm really excited to get those built and attached. Now, of course, I still have one more wing to finish up, and we are going to end on me getting to work on that. But here's a couple shots of these pieces on the wing.